The night he knocked on my door, the snow was coming down sideways, the way it does when the wind has a grudge against you. I remember thinking it sounded like someone was throwing handfuls of rice against the windows. The house was quiet in that way it gets in winter, when the heater hums like it's half asleep, and the clock in the hallway suddenly sounds too loud. I had a mug of stale cocoa between my hands, TV on low for company, and my knees wrapped in an old quilt my mother made back when her hands could still hold a needle. At 58, you don't expect your life to change on a Tuesday night in December. You expect heartburn. Maybe a call from one of your children asking for money. You don't expect a hard knock at the door in the middle of a snowstorm. The first knock I ignored. I told myself it was the branch that always scraped the siding when the wind got wild. The second knock was louder, firmer, like a man clearing his throat. The third one made the picture frames on the wall tremble. I shuffled to the door, my slippers whispering against the old wood floor. I remember being annoyed, if I'm honest. Annoyance is safe. Annoyance keeps you from asking why your heart is beating faster than it should. When I opened the door, I saw him. He stood on my porch like the snow had built itself around him, piled up on the railing on his shoulders in the curls of his dark hair. He wasn't young, but he wasn't my age either. Late 30s, early 40s maybe. A heavy coat, worn leather gloves, a scarf wrapped high over his jaw. His eyes were the first thing that bothered me, steady, too steady, like he'd already decided something about me. "Can I help you?" I asked, pulling my cardigan tighter around myself. He smiled, small and careful. "Evening, ma'am, are you Ruth?" Something in me twitched. "Who's asking?" He lowered his voice, took one step closer so the porch light caught his face. "You're Ruth Ann, aren't you? My father used to call you Little Anchor." I felt the world tilt under my feet. Little Anchor. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in almost 40 years. My father's voice set it in my head immediately, warm and rough from years of cigarettes and factory air. "You're my little anchor, Ruthie. You keep us steady when the waters get mean." Nobody else called me that. Not my mother, not my siblings, not my ex-husband. Nobody. The man on my porch watched my face carefully. Like my reaction was the answer to a question he'd been carrying a long time. "Where did you hear that?" I heard my own voice go thin. "Who are you?" "May I come in?" he asked instead. "It's freezing out here. I drove a long way to find you." Normal people would have shut the door or called the police, but I've never known how to put myself first, not really. Not after a lifetime of being told that good women keep the kettle warm and the door open, no matter what. So I stepped aside. "Fine, wipe your boots." He did, carefully. The way he watched the floor as he entered told me he'd been raised to respect other people's houses. That bothered me, too. Men who ask permission and wipe their boots usually want something they're ashamed to say out loud. He took off his coat and the scarf, shaking melted snow onto the mat. Up close, I saw faint lines around his eyes, like someone who smiled often but not easily. He held his gloves in one hand as if he didn't want to assume he was welcome to stay. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Thank you for letting me in, Ms. Ruth." Nobody had called me Ms. Ruth since the kids at Sunday school, years ago, back when I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, God would make my family kind. "Kitchen," I said shortly. "It's warmer there." As he followed me down the narrow hallway, past the photos I never took down even when the people in them stopped calling, I felt the past crowd in behind us. My family's faces watched us from their frames. My father with his tired smile, my mother with her stiff jaw, my brother George laughing with a beer in his hand, my sister Elaine with her perfect hair, my ex-husband Mark standing beside me like he'd rather be anywhere else. I caught Daniel glancing at the wall of photos. His eyes lingered on one picture in particular. My father holding me when I was 8, my legs hooked around his waist, his cheek pressed against my hair. "That's him," Daniel said softly. "That's Robert, isn't it, your father?" I stopped walking. "How do you know my father's name?" I asked. "And don't tell me you just guessed. We're in a town with 50 Roberts at least." He looked at me, that steady gaze again. "Because I've heard about him my whole life." Something cold, that had nothing to do with the snow, slid down my spine. In the kitchen, the small, old space seemed to shrink just to fit us and nothing else. The yellowed cabinets, the humming fridge, the little table pushed against the wall, they've always been my kingdom, the only place in this world where I felt I had a say. That night, it felt like a witness box. "Sit," I said, more harsh than I meant, partly to cover the shake in my hands. "You want coffee?" "Yes, ma'am, if it's not too much trouble." Too much trouble? I almost laughed. People like me don't know how to say, "It is too much trouble." We apologize while we're doing it. While the coffee machine sputtered and gurgled, I watched him study the room. His eyes landed on details nobody else ever noticed. The chipped blue plate on the counter, the old calendar still turned to last month, the little crack in the window where a baseball once hit when my son Thomas was 12. He seemed to memorize it. "So," I said, arms folded, standing instead of sitting, "you show up here in the middle of a snowstorm, knowing my name, my father's name, and a nickname nobody else knows. You want to tell me how exactly?" He wrapped his hands around the warm mug when I set it in front of him, as if I'd offered him gold. "I will," he said, "but it might be easier to start with who you are from my side of the story." "I know who I am," I snapped, then immediately regretted the bite. Old habits. "You're the one who needs to explain." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but if you know who you are, Ms. Ruth, why have you been punished your whole life for things you never did?" The words hit me so hard, I had to grab the back of the chair. "Punished your whole life?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out but a humorless breath of air that might have been a laugh. "You don't know anything about my life," I said finally. He tilted his head. "Don't I, though? You're the oldest daughter, aren't you? The one who stayed. The one they called in the middle of the night when something went wrong, but forgot to invite when something went right. The one who understood when they didn't have the money to pay you back. The one who got called ungrateful when you stopped saying yes." For a second, the kitchen blurred. I blinked hard. It's one thing to live through something. It's another thing entirely to hear a stranger summarize your whole life in 3 sentences. "Who told you that?" I whispered. "Elaine, George." He shook his head. "My family," he said. "People you've never met. People who have been carrying pieces of your story without your name attached." The kettle whistled on the stove, shrill and desperate. I turned it off just to have something to do. I like to tell myself now that I saw it coming, that I sensed the shift in the air that night. But the truth is, I didn't. All I knew was that a stranger had walked into my kitchen and spoken the kind of truth my own mother never let past her lips. And hearing him unlocked something. Maybe that's why my mind slipped backward, the way it does when you smell an old scent or hear a familiar song. While Daniel sipped his coffee, I remembered the first time I understood my place in this family. It was my 8th birthday. There been no party, of course. My mother said parties were foolish things for people who wanted to show off. She baked a small cake, yellow with chocolate frosting, and wrote my name crookedly on top. I didn't mind. I thought it was beautiful. I thought anything with my name on it was beautiful back then. We were in the tiny kitchen of the old house, the one my grandparents had lived in before us. My father came home from the factory, smelling of metal and sweat, with a wide smile on his face. He picked me up, spun me around, called me his little anchor, said I kept him steady when everything else in his life wanted to drift away. Then my brother George, all of 6 and already louder than any room, burst in crying because the boys down the street had broken his toy truck. My mother turned from me to him like a sunflower to the sun. She wiped his tears with the edge of her apron, cooed over him, promised they'd get him a new one when they had the money. My cake sat on the table, candle burning down low. When it was finally time to blow it out, my mother was tired, my father was already asleep in his chair, and George was sulking in the corner. I closed my eyes and made a wish anyway, that when I grew up, people would remember my birthdays without me reminding them. Years later, when my own children forgot to call, I realized wishes don't care how much you want them. They just go where the light is. "Ms. Ruth," Daniel's voice pulled me back to the kitchen. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Keep talking." He hesitated, then set his mug down carefully, as if he were afraid of breaking more than the ceramic. "I know you don't have a reason to trust me yet," he said, "but the things that happened in your family, they didn't stay in your family. Some of them spilled over. Some of them hurt people you don't even know, and some of those people were mine." I frowned. "Yours?" "My father, mainly," he said, "and his brother, and the woman they both claimed they didn't know." My stomach clenched. "Your father's name?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. "Patrick," he said, "Patrick Miller." The name hit me like a slap. My hands went cold. For a moment, I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I was 17 again, standing in the back hallway of our old house, listening to my parents argue in low, vicious whispers about a man named Patrick, money that had gone missing, and a girl from the wrong side of town. I remembered my mother's eyes when she realized I was listening. "Go to your room, Ruth Ann," she'd hissed. "This doesn't concern you. Everything will be fine if you just keep your mouth shut. Everything will be fine if you just keep your mouth shut." That was the first lesson of my life. The second was that it was always my job to make sure everyone else stayed comfortable, even if it meant standing ankle-deep in their secrets. "Patrick," I repeated now, my voice barely more than a breath. "I haven't heard that name in decades." Daniel nodded, watching me carefully. "I know, they made sure of that." The heater kicked on with a groan, pushing warm air through old vents. Outside, the wind howled against the siding like something that wanted in. Inside, something else was finally scratching at the door. "Why are you here?" I asked, sinking into the chair opposite him at last. My legs suddenly didn't feel strong enough to hold me. "What do you want from me? Money, an apology? I don't have much of the first, and I've given too much of the second." "I don't want your money," he said. "And as for apologies, I think you and I both have given more than our share." "Then what?" I demanded. He leaned forward, folded his hands, and spoke the words that would tear my life neatly into before and after. "I'm here because the story your family told you about who you are and what happened is not the story the rest of us were given," he said quietly. "I'm here to tell you what they did, and why you were the one who paid for it." My mouth went dry. Somewhere in the house, the clock in the hallway chimed, marking the hour like a judge striking a gavel. I stared at the man in front of me, at the snow swirling outside the kitchen window, at my own trembling hands on the table, and I realized something I'd never dared say out loud. I wanted to know. I wanted to know what they had done in my name. I wanted to know why my life felt like a sentence I'd been serving without ever learning the crime. "Start then," I said, voice low. "Tell me." He nodded once. "All right," he answered. "But once I tell you, Ms. Ruth, you won't be able to go back to not knowing." As he opened his mouth to begin, I felt that truth settle over us like the snow outside, soft at first, then heavier and heavier, until you look up and realize the whole world has changed color. I don't know how long we sat there after he said those words. Time does something strange when someone tells you your whole life is a story you heard secondhand. The clock on the wall kept ticking, the heater kept wheezing, the snow kept shouldering itself against the windows, but everything inside me went very, very still. "I'm not going to ask again," I finally said. "If you're here to tell me, then tell me. Start at the beginning." Daniel didn't argue. That bothered me too. The men in my family always had to prove something, always had to raise their voices to sound like they were right. He just nodded, like he'd already had this conversation 100 times in his head and was finally hitting play. "All right," he said quietly. "Then let's start with the night your father fell down the stairs." My stomach clenched, so hard I had to suck in a breath. There are moments you fold neatly and put in the back of your mind like sweaters you don't want to wear anymore. That night was one of mine. I'd pressed it flat for decades, pretended it didn't take up space. But the minute he spoke it out loud, it puffed back up, full and heavy, and exactly the same size as when it first happened. "How do you know about that?" I asked. "Because where I come from," he said, "we weren't told it was an accident." My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "It was," I said automatically. "Everyone knows that. He'd been working double shifts. He was tired. Those stairs were old. He slipped. "Is that what you saw?" Daniel asked. "Or what you were told?" The question landed like a pebble in a deep well. I waited for the splash of anger, the echo of defense. Instead, all I heard was my own breathing. I closed my eyes. "I heard it," I said. "I heard the fall." The memory opened like a door. I was 19 again, home from my first semester at community college, sleeping on the lumpy couch because Elaine had taken my old room so she could have more closet space. The house smelled like fried onions and Old Spice. It was past midnight when the shouting started. I told myself it was the TV. My parents fought in whispers to keep up appearances. The loud noises were for football games and grandchildren, not accusations. Then there was a hard, ugly sound, like a body knocking into wood. A pause, and then the thud-thud-thud down the stairs. I remember my mother's scream. I remember my own legs refusing to move for half a heartbeat, my hands gripping the blanket so tight my knuckles popped. When I finally stumbled into the hallway, my father was at the bottom of the stairs, his head at a wrong angle, his arm caught under him like a broken branch. Elaine was standing halfway up the staircase, white as the wall, hand flat against the banister. "What happened?" I'd cried. "He tripped," she'd said, so quickly it was almost on top of my question. "He fell. Call an ambulance, Ruth, now." By the time the paramedics came, my mother had her story straight. My father had been tired. He'd gotten up for water. He must have missed a step. The nice young officer who took notes nodded solemnly. Nobody asked my sister where her red fingernail-shaped scratches on the banister came from. "He was drunk," my mother said the next day when I asked why he'd been on the stairs in the middle of the night. "What does it matter how it happened? Stop making a scene." I never asked again. I opened my eyes and realized Daniel was watching me, not pushing, not filling the silence. "I heard the fall," I repeated. "I saw where he landed. I saw Elaine on the stairs, that's what I know." He reached into his bag then, the old satchel he'd brought in with his coat, and set quietly beside his chair. The sound of the zipper made my skin prickle. He pulled out a manila folder, thick and worn at the edges. He slid it across the table toward me. "I'm not here to tell you what to believe," he said, "but I'm here to show you what never made it to your house." On the front of the folder was a small, stamped label with my father's name on it. Below that, in blue ink, the year he died. My hands shook when I opened it. Inside were photocopies of police reports, more than one, statements, a note from a neighbor who'd called 911 because she heard raised voices and a loud crash, possibly a domestic disturbance. A second note that had been crossed out in pen. Subject reports hearing a woman shout, "Let go of me," prior to the fall. My heart stuttered. "That second note," Daniel said quietly, tapping the page. "The one crossed out, that's from Mrs. Davenport. She lived next door, remember?" "Of course I remember," I snapped, more sharply than I meant. "She used to bring us cookies every Christmas until she moved away." He held my gaze. "She didn't move away, Ms. Ruth. She died, 10 years after your father. My father was the paramedic on that call. She told him about that night." The kitchen swayed, just a little. "Your father was," I swallowed. "You said his name was Patrick Miller." He nodded. "He was on the ambulance that came for your dad. He remembered the house, the stairs, the wife who kept correcting her own story like she was editing herself in real time." My mouth went dry. "You're saying my mother pushed him?" "I'm saying," Daniel answered, "that people outside your house asked questions your family didn't want you to hear. The official report got cleaned up before it reached you. But the first draft still existed. In my father's notes, in his stories, in the way he'd go quiet when our route took us past this street." I stared at the page, at the thin, straight lines of someone else's handwriting slicing through the neighbor's words. My chest felt tight, like my ribs had turned to fists. "My mother was a lot of things," I whispered. "Cold, controlling, quick with guilt, but she wasn't a killer." He didn't nod, didn't shake his head. "Maybe she wasn't," he said. "Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was a struggle that went wrong. I can't tell you what happened on those stairs. I can only tell you that somebody made sure you never saw these questions. The urge to defend my family rose up like a reflex. She had 3 kids, I said. A husband in the ground, bills up to her neck. She did what she had to do. And part of what she had to do, he replied softly, was make you feel like the world would fall apart if you stepped out of line. Keeping you scared, keeping you grateful, keeping you blind, that served someone, didn't it? I hated that I knew he was right. I closed the folder. It felt heavier than before. I don't see what this has to do with you, I muttered. With your family. He reached for his coffee again, and for a while the only sound in the room was the heater trying its best. Can I ask you another question? He said after a moment. You've already asked too many. I know, he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. But this one matters. Why didn't you leave for college when you had the chance? The question hit a different bruise. I didn't have the money, I said. It's not complicated. Funny, he said, because the paperwork I've seen says you did. He pulled out another folder. This one had my name on it. I didn't touch it. I'm not. You don't have to read it, he said gently. I'll tell you what's in it. He flipped it open, scanning the pages like he'd memorized them. You had a savings account your father started when you were 9, he said. $50 from every paycheck when he could manage it. He wanted you to have what he never did. It was supposed to be for college. There's a note here in his handwriting, for Ruth's future. No one touches this but her. My throat burned. I never saw that, I whispered. Nobody ever. I know, Daniel said. Because when he died, that account didn't last long. There was a withdrawal, 1 week later, the full amount, signed by your mother with a power of attorney that was, let's say, prepared very quickly. My hands curled into fists on my lap. She needed to keep the lights on, I said, even as the words tasted like someone else's excuses in my mouth. Funeral costs, hospital bills. There were bills, yes, Daniel said, and some of the money went there, but not all of it. He slid one page toward me, his finger tapping a line of text. Here's a transfer, he said. Same week, larger than any bill, it went to a law firm across town, the retainer for a defense attorney. Defense, I echoed. He nodded. Your brother George, he said. He'd been picked up on a DUI, hit a parked car. There was a girl with him, just 18, from the wrong side of town, like you said earlier. The girl's parents wanted charges. They wanted consequences. They wanted someone to pay. My heart thudded hard. I remembered the hushed days when my mother wouldn't meet my eyes, when George kept disappearing and coming back smelling like beer and cologne, when my mother told me not to go downtown, not to ask questions, not to answer the phone. I was told the college money was gone, I said, hearing my younger voice in my head. That there were debts I didn't know about, that we had to pay for things. You did pay, Daniel said, just not for your own future. He flipped another page. The charges got reduced, he said. The girl's parents were persuaded to drop some of their demands. There was a settlement, cash, an agreement to keep things quiet. My chest hurt. What does this have to do with your family? I asked, the words coming out more jagged now. You keep saying we and us and where I come from. What does any of this have to do with you? He looked up from the papers, and for the first time since he'd walked into my kitchen, I saw anger in his eyes. Not wild, not loud, but deep, like a river that had been cutting the same path for years. Because that girl, he said quietly, was my aunt. The room tilted again. She was 16, he went on, working part-time at the diner, saving up to get out of town. She thought George was going to marry her. He told her he loved her. He told her he was going to talk to your parents about it. I could see it. Of course I could see it. George with his easy smile and his big promises. The way girls looked at him when he walked into a room, the way he believed the world owed him fun and forgiveness in equal measure. The night of the crash, Daniel continued, they'd been at a party. He was drunk. She wanted to go home. He told her to stop being a nag. The car hit a parked truck. George walked away with a few bruises. She didn't. I swallowed hard. Is she? She lived, he said. For a while, the injuries changed everything. She couldn't stand for long hours. She dropped out of school. The settlement money disappeared faster than anyone expected. They told her to be grateful it wasn't worse, to move on, to stay quiet. And she did, because she was scared. Because people like your family had friends and money and connections, and people like mine had rumors about being troublemakers. His words lashed through me, each one striking in a place I didn't know still hurt. And your father, I asked hoarsely. Patrick, where was he in all this? He was the one who drove her home from the hospital, Daniel said. He was the one who sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and explained that if they pushed too hard, they'd get nothing. He was the one who saw your mother at the bank the next week. He told my grandmother, they're protecting their boy at all costs. That girl, she's collateral. The word hung in the air like smoke. Collateral. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to contain the pounding in my head. You're lying, I whispered, though my voice had no weight behind it. You have to be. My mother would never. She wouldn't choose him over me. Not like that. Wouldn't she? He asked gently. Think about it, Ms. Ruth. When has she ever chosen you first? The answer came so quickly it scared me. Never. There were always reasons, always explanations. George needed one more chance. Elaine needed to be protected. Mark needed time to find himself. The grandchildren needed stability. The church needed appearances. There was always someone more fragile, more important, more in need, and I was always the one who could handle disappointment, who could swallow hurt, who could be understanding. Because that's what good women do, right? They understand. I must have gone quiet for a long time, because my phone buzzing on the counter made me jump. I glanced at the screen. Elaine. Of course. I let it ring once, twice. Daniel watched me, saying nothing. On the third ring, habit 1, I answered. Hello. Finally, Elaine's voice snapped, sharp enough to cut. I've been calling you for 10 minutes. The lines are a mess because of the storm. It's snowing, not the apocalypse, I said before I could stop myself. She ignored that. Is he there? She demanded. That man, the one going around town asking questions. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said, he's here. You let him in, she sounded scandalized. Are you out of your mind, Ruth? Do you have any idea what he's doing, the things he's saying? I've heard some of them, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calmer than I felt. He has paperwork. There's always paperwork, she snapped. Anybody can print anything these days. He's trying to dig up old wounds, for money. They do this, you know, these people. They find families who went through tragedies and they exploit them. You need to tell him to leave, right now. I watched Daniel over the rim of the phone. He didn't react, didn't flinch at being called these people. He just waited. What if he's not lying? I asked quietly. On the other end, there was a shocked inhale. Don't you start, Elaine said, her voice turning cold. You know how Mama gets when you stir things up. She's barely holding on as it is, and you want to feed her lies about your father being some kind of monster. You think that will help. All this will do is destroy what's left of this family. I almost laughed. What's left? As if we were some delicate heirloom instead of a pile of sharp edges. Maybe it needs destroying, I murmured. What did you say? Nothing. She launched into a speech then about loyalty and outsiders and people who don't know the whole story. I heard the words, but underneath them I heard something else. Fear. Not the kind that comes from danger. The kind that comes from being seen. Listen to me, Ruth, she said finally, her voice dropping into the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. You always take things too personally. You always have. You're sensitive. And these kinds of people, they can smell that. They'll twist your memories, make you doubt things that happened 30 years ago. Is that what you want? To spend your old age confused and angry over things nobody can fix? I looked at the folder with my father's handwriting, at the transfer slips, at the neighbor's crossed-out statement. I'm already confused and angry, I said. I'm just finally figuring out where to point it. Ruth, her voice sharpened again. Tell him to leave. Now, I'm serious. If you keep entertaining this, don't you dare drag the rest of us down with you. I won't have my name mixed up in some circus. Do you understand me? There it was, the real concern, her name. I understand, I said softly, and hung up before she could say more. My hand shook when I put the phone back on the counter. The silence afterward was deafening. She wants you gone, I said. I figured, Daniel replied. They usually do. You've done this before, I asked, surprised. He tilted his head. I've had a lot of conversations nobody wanted to have, he said, not just with your family. The wind howled around the corners of the house. Somewhere down the street, a tree branch cracked under the weight of the snow. Were you close? He asked after a moment. You and your sister. I let out a small, humorless laugh. She always said we were, I replied, but only when she needed something. You protected her. I protected everyone, I said. That was my job. Who gave you that job? He asked. I opened my mouth to say nobody, then realized the truth. They all had. In small ways, in comments, in expectations. In the way they looked at me when something went wrong, like I was the only one who knew where the towels and the lies were kept. Does this feel like protecting them? Daniel asked softly, nodding toward the folders. Letting this in. I looked at the papers again. My father's careful note about my future. The bank transfers. The law firm. The story about a girl whose life had been bent around my brother's mistakes. No, I said. It feels like protecting myself for once. He nodded, as if that were the answer he'd been hopping for. We talked like that for hours, him asking questions that felt less like interrogation and more like someone holding a flashlight while I went down into the basement of my own memory. Each story he brought out had a matching echo in me. The night of my brother's car crash, when my mother told me we don't ask what people were doing out that late, we just thank God everyone's alive. The day my college counselor called our house to ask why I hadn't shown up to orientation, and my mother took the phone into her bedroom and told her, Ruth has decided family comes first. Then emerged with that satisfied little smile she wore when she'd successfully traded my choices for someone else's comfort. The time my ex-husband, Mark, forgot our rent money at the casino, and my mother shook her head and said, Men make mistakes. You're the strong one. You'll figure it out, while writing a check with my name on it from an account I didn't know existed. Every memory I pulled out, Daniel had a document, a name, a date that curved it into a bigger picture. It was like seeing the back of a tapestry after a lifetime of staring at the front. All the knots and strings that made the pretty design hold together were uglier than I'd imagined. At some point, the caffeine wore off and the exhaustion settled in. My eyes burned. My bones ached. But my mind was wired, unable to let go. He glanced at the window, where the snow swirled like a shaken globe. Roads'll be closed till morning, he said. I can sleep in my car. You'll sleep in the guest room, I interrupted. I'm not having a stranger freeze to death outside my house. The gossip alone would kill me. He smiled, real this time, a quick flash that softened his face. Yes, ma'am. He rose to take his bag down the hall, then paused. Your sister will come, he said. If not tonight, then first thing in the morning. She won't like not being in the room. She always has to be in the room, I muttered. She thinks she is the room. He chuckled under his breath and disappeared down the hall. It was hours later, when the sky outside was a dull, heavy gray and my eyes refused to stay closed, that the doorbell rang. I knew it was her before I opened it. The smell of expensive perfume had already seeped under the crack. Elaine stood on my porch wrapped in a faux fur coat, her hair perfect, her lipstick brighter than the snow. She swept past me into the hallway without waiting to be invited, shaking flakes off her sleeves like the weather had personally offended her. Where is he? She demanded, eyes flashing. Where's this Daniel person? Asleep, I said. He drove in a blizzard. I thought the Christian thing to do was not let him die in a snowbank. She glared at me, then at the wall of photos, as if considering which version of our family she wanted him to see. He's filling your head with nonsense, she hissed. Mama is beside herself. She says if you drag Daddy's name through the mud, she'll never forgive you. I almost asked her when, exactly, our mother had forgiven me for anything. Instead, I said, maybe Daddy's name doesn't belong where they put it. You sound crazy, she snapped. Listen to yourself. Our father was a good man. He worked himself to death for us. I thought of the crossed-out note. The neighbor who heard a woman shout, "Let go of me." He was a complicated man, I said. The truth doesn't make him less, it just makes him real. She narrowed her eyes. You've always had this martyr thing, she said. Like you're the only one who sees things clearly. It's embarrassing, Ruth. You make everything harder than it needs to be. This man is nothing. He's looking for a payout, that's all. He hasn't asked for money, I said. Yet, she retorted. As if on cue, Daniel appeared at the end of the hall, hair damp from the shower. Wearing the same clothes as the night before, but somehow looking more solid in the morning light. He had his bag over his shoulder. Ms. Elaine, he guessed, extending a hand. She looked at it like it was something she'd found under her shoe. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said instead, voice dripping with contempt. Coming into our town, harassing our mother, upsetting my sister. Whatever sob story you have, save it for someone who cares. For a second, I felt that old pull to smooth things over, to laugh, to apologize on his behalf, to offer her coffee and change the subject. I could feel the words lining up in my throat like obedient soldiers. I swallowed them. Daniel, to his credit, didn't look offended. He just lowered his hand. I'm not here to harass anyone, ma'am, he said. I'm here because someone asked me to tell the truth before it was too late. Too late for what? She snapped. For you to get your money? Because let me tell you, we don't have any. Whatever you think Daddy did, whatever you think we owe, that's between you and your therapist, not us. Daniel's jaw tightened for the first time. I'm not asking you for money, he said evenly. I'm asking you to admit that some of the things your sister has carried alone belonged to all of you. Don't psychoanalyze me, she sneered. You don't know anything about us. He tilted his head. I know you were the one who convinced your mother to drain Ruth's college fund, he said quietly. You told her it wasn't fair for George's life to be ruined over one mistake, when Ruth could always go back to school later. Elaine froze. For a moment, all the color drained from her face, leaving her lipstick floating on a sea of shock. Then she recovered, faster than I would have. That's ridiculous, she said. You can't prove that. He reached into his bag again and pulled out a single folded paper. Actually, he said, I can. Your name's right here, signed as a witness to the withdrawal. That's your handwriting, isn't it? He handed it to her. Her eyes darted over the ink. I watched the moment recognition hit her. She tore the paper in half. This means nothing, she said, voice shaking now. You dig up a few old forms and think you know us. You don't know what it was like. Daddy was gone, Mama was falling apart, George was. George was still drinking, I cut in. My voice surprised both of us. And you were still covering for him, and I was still understanding. She turned on me. Don't you dare start judging us, she said, tears finally spilling over. You were always so high and mighty, Ruth, like you were better because you stayed. You think you're the only one who sacrificed. I married a man I didn't love for stability. I gave Mama grandchildren so she'd stop crying about you leaving. I did what I had to do. I believed her. That was the worst part. We were all just women doing what we thought we had to do, trampling each other by accident. I'm not judging you, I said quietly. I'm just tired of pretending none of this happened. I'm tired of being the only one who has to swallow it. Elaine looked between me and Daniel, chest heaving. For a second, I saw something crack in her. Fear, shame, the heavy realization that the past wasn't going to stay buried just because she wanted it to. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her coat, and put the mask back on. If you keep going down this road, she said coldly, you're going to tear this family apart, and don't expect me to pick up the pieces. She stormed past Daniel, past me, out into the snow. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood there, staring at the door, breathing hard. She'll call Mama, I said finally. They'll circle the wagons. They already have, Daniel replied. I spoke to your mother yesterday. I turned to him, startled. You what? He nodded. She told me never to come near you. She said you were impressionable, that you'd believe anything anyone told you if they used the right words. A bitter laugh escaped me. She would know, I said. We went back to the kitchen. The folders waited on the table like quiet accusations. Why? I asked after a long silence. Why now? Why come here after all these years? It's not like any of this can be fixed. He sat down, rested his hands on the table, and for the first time since he arrived, I saw him look unsure. I've shown you pieces, he said slowly. My father's notes, the transfers, my aunt's story. But there's something I haven't told you yet. The real reason I'm here, the person who sent me. I felt the air change. The house seemed to lean in closer. You said your father remembered this house, I said. That he drove past sometimes. He did, Daniel said, but he wasn't the one who sent me. Your aunt. He shook his head. She died last year, he said softly. Not long after my father, we were going through their things. They left a box labeled with your family's name. Inside were all these papers, notes, letters, things they'd kept but never talked about. At the bottom of the box was an envelope with my name on it and one sentence on the front. Give this to the girl who kept paying our price. My breath caught. I opened it, he continued. Inside was a letter and an address, yours, and a request. From who? I whispered. He held my eyes. From the woman your family spent years calling, that girl, like she was a mistake instead of a person, he said quietly. From my grandmother. From the one who watched her daughter's life get rerouted so your brother could walk free. The one who knew your name even though you never knew hers. The room was so silent, I could hear the snow sliding off the roof in heavy, wet sheets. She asked me to find you, he went on, to tell you what happened, to put the truth where it belonged before she died. She said she couldn't rest knowing you were out here, still apologizing for things you didn't do. My throat closed up. I pressed my hand against my chest as if I could keep my heart from bursting out. And this night, I managed. Why tonight? He glanced at the window, at the churning white outside, then back at me. She told me to come on the first night the snow came heavy, he said. She said, go when the roads are bad, so nobody can drag that woman away from the table before she hears you out. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. She also told me one more thing, Ms. Ruth, he said. Something about you, something your father did the night before he died to try to protect you, something your family never forgave him for. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. What? I asked, barely breathing. What did he do? Daniel opened the last envelope on the table, slid a single page toward me, and looked me straight in the eye. That, he said softly, is where the real story starts. By morning, the storm had calmed down just enough to let trouble through. The snow on the street had been plowed into uneven walls, like someone had carved a narrow trench from house to house. The sky was the color of dirty dishwater. The world was quieter than it should have been, that strange, muffled quiet that always comes after a night of chaos, like the town was pretending nothing had happened, while the ground still remembered every tire that slid and every branch that snapped. I stood at the living room window with my coffee, watching the breath of the world creep slowly back in. My hands were wrapped around the mug, but I wasn't feeling the heat. I was thinking about the page Daniel had slid across the table the night before, the one he'd said was where the real story started. I'd waited until he went to the guest room. Then I'd unfolded it with the same dread I had opening my electricity bill every winter. It was my father's handwriting. I'd have known it anywhere. Strong, blocky letters, as if he could hold the pen as hard as he used to hold metal on the factory floor. The date at the top was the night before he died. There were only a few lines, but I'd read them until the words blurred. If anything happens to me, don't believe it was Ruth. She's the only one who tells the truth, and that's why they'll blame her. I've put copies of what I know with the man from the ambulance. One day it'll come back around. To whoever finds this, protect my little anchor. They'll use her to keep themselves afloat. It wasn't a will. It wasn't even a proper letter. It was more like a confession he'd never had a chance to finish. The bottom of the page had a smear, like his hand slipped, like someone had yanked the paper away. I pressed the letter against my chest last night and sobbed quietly into my own pillow for the first time in years. Not because of what he said about them, but because he remembered me. Because in the middle of whatever hell he was in, he'd thought about me as something worth protecting. Morning light made the ink look harsher, less forgiving. Behind me, I heard Daniel's footsteps. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "A little." It was a lie. I'd closed my eyes, sure. But sleep? No. My mind wouldn't let go of the image of my father hunched over this very table, writing to people he'd barely met because he knew the ones in his own house would twist the story. Daniel came to stand beside me, looking out the window. "They'll come today," he said, "now that the roads are open." I nodded. "I know." He glanced at the mug in my hands. "You want me here when they do." The old me would have said, "No, no, please, I'll handle it. I don't want to cause trouble." That sentence has been my prayer for half my life. Instead, I thought of my father's words. They'll use her to keep themselves afloat. "Yes," I said, "I want you here." He nodded once, like a bailiff acknowledging a judge's order. The first car appeared around 10, George's truck, tires chewing through the slush, music thumping faintly even with the windows rolled up. He parked crooked, like he always did, as if lines were suggestions meant for other people. A second car pulled in behind him, Elaine's silver SUV. I could see her silhouette even through the tinted glass, back straight, chin high, like a queen arriving at a coronation. My stomach twisted when I saw the third vehicle crawl up behind them. My ex-husband's familiar dull blue sedan. Mark, of course. Because when you're on trial, they don't just call your family. They call character witnesses. "Full house," Daniel murmured. "You sure you're ready?" I asked. He gave me a quiet half-smile. "I've been getting ready for this my whole life," he said. "The real question is, are you?" I didn't answer. I just set the mug down and walked toward the front door, each step feeling like it echoed more than it should. George didn't knock. He burst in the moment I turned the knob, stomping snow off his boots like he was trying to kill it. "What the hell is going on, Ruth?" he barked by way of greeting. "You got some vulture sniffing around the family, asking questions about Daddy, and you say nothing." Behind him, Elaine swept in, tight smile already plastered on. Mark slunk in after them, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes darting around like he was checking for exit routes. "Good morning to you too," I said. Elaine sniffed. "We were worried," she said like she was reciting a line. "Mama's upset. You didn't answer her last call." "I was busy," I said. George snorted. "Busy spreading lies, apparently." I opened my mouth, but Daniel appeared behind me then, stepping into the hallway. "Good morning," he said, calm as a doctor. "I'm Daniel Miller." 3 sets of eyes snapped to him. George sized him up like a man at a bar deciding whether this was a fight he could win. Elaine looked him over like a stain on a new rug. Mark smirked, that lazy, dismissive curve of his mouth I'd once mistaken for charm. "So you're the one," George said. "The ambulance baby, the one stirring up old mess." "George," Elaine hissed, elbowing him. She turned to Daniel with a brittle smile. "We appreciate your concern, but our father died a long time ago. There's no need to drag his memory through gossip." "I agree," Daniel said. "That's why I'm not here with gossip. I'm here with documents." He lifted the satchel in his hand slightly. The leather creaked. "Well, I'm here with sense," Elaine said tightly. "And the sense says you should leave my sister alone and take your papers back to whatever conspiracy group you run with." "Enough," I said quietly. It wasn't loud, but they all heard it. Some part of them still remembered when my word meant something, when they were younger and I was the one who broke up their fights and cleaned up their messes. They followed me into the living room. That room has seen births, deaths, fights, holidays, and more apologies than I can count. But that day, it became something else. The furniture turned into rows of benches in my mind, the coffee table a witness stand. Elaine took the armchair by the window, the throne always. George dropped heavily onto the couch, legs spread wide. Mark sat at the far end, leaning back, trying to look like he was above all this. I stayed standing for a moment, feeling the worn carpet under my feet, the grooves in the floor where the sofa had been in the same place for 20 years. Daniel stood near the TV, back straight, satchel at his feet like a lawyer about to give opening arguments. "Well," George said, "you going to tell us what this is about, or we gonna sit here all day?" I looked at Daniel. He nodded slightly, like we'd rehearsed this and I'd hit my cue. "This is about stories," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The ones we were told about what happened in this family, and the ones that were kept from me." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Elaine muttered. "Ruth." "Honestly." "No," I said. "You all had your version. I listened to it for 40 years. Today you're going to listen to mine, and to his." I gestured toward Daniel. George laughed loud and ugly. "This is rich," he said. "What, you think you're some victim now? You lived in Daddy's house same as the rest of us. You ate his food, used his money. Now you want to." Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out the first folder. "Mr. Carter," he said, using that tone professionals use when they're reminding you of something you'd rather forget. "You remember the night of your father's fall." "What business is that of yours?" George snapped. Daniel opened the folder and laid a paper on the coffee table. "This is the original incident report from that night," he said. "Not the cleaned-up version your family received. The first one. The one that includes the neighbor's statement before it was altered." Elaine's jaw tightened. George's eyes flicked to the paper and back up. "This doesn't prove anything," Elaine said. "Anybody can type something up." Daniel slid a second paper on top of the first. "And this is the officer's handwritten notes," he said. "Notice the identical case number. Notice the reference to a secondary witness." He read, voice level. "Neighbor reports hearing loud argument, female voice shouting, 'Let go of me,' followed by impact and fall. Husband unresponsive at bottom of stairs. Wife insists it was an accident. Adult daughter present on stairs appears shaken." His eyes moved to Elaine. "You were that daughter," he said, "weren't you?" Color crept up her neck. "I was on the stairs because I heard a noise," she said. "I came to see what happened, that's all." "Funny," Daniel replied, "because Mrs. Davenport remembered it differently." "How would you know what she remembered?" Elaine shot back. "She's dead." "She is," he agreed. "But before she died, she told my father what she saw. He wrote it down. And since you think anyone can type anything, maybe you'll appreciate hearing it from someone who was actually there." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then hit a button. A crackling voice filled the room. "I'm telling you, Patrick, I saw it as clear as I see you. They were at the top of the stairs, the two of them arguing. He grabbed her wrist, she shoved him off, and down he went. He'd been drinking, sure, but that shove, I'll see that shove when I'm in the grave. And that girl, the older one, she was halfway up, frozen like a deer. Whole house went quiet, like it was waiting to see which story they'd pick." The room went cold. Even George stopped smirking. "That recording is 30 years old," Daniel said quietly. "My father kept it. He kept everything. He knew someday someone might need it." Elaine's eyes shone with angry tears. "He grabbed her," she burst out. "You weren't there. Daddy grabbed at her. He was drunk. He lost his balance." "And instead of saying that," I cut in softly, "you all agreed it was an accident and never spoke of it again. At least not to me." "Why would we?" George snapped. "What good would it have done to drag Mama's name through the mud? She was alone, widowed, trying to hold us together. You want to paint her as some kind of murderer now. Is that it?" "I want," I said slowly, "to stop pretending that the only thing she ever did wrong was overcook the turkey. That's all." Mark cleared his throat. "If we're going to rehash ancient history," he drawled, "maybe we can also talk about all the times Ruth flew off the handle over nothing. You've always had a flair for drama, babe." Babe, the word made my skin crawl. You were married into this family for 15 years, Daniel said, turning to him. You benefited from their money, their silence, their habit of putting their problems on Ruth's shoulders. I benefited from her insanity, if that's what you mean, Mark said with a thin smile. You think she started this victim routine yesterday? She's been rewriting reality since the day I met her. You should have seen her when the college thing didn't work out. You'd have thought we burned the university to the ground, the way she carried on. My cheeks burned. I remembered that version of myself all too well, sitting on my bed with a torn brochure in my hand, listening to my mother explain that there just wasn't enough for selfish dreams, not when the family needed me. Daniel reached for another folder. Funny you mention college, he said, since that's the second thing we need to talk about. He laid out the withdrawal slips, the transfer documents, the retainer to the law firm, just like he'd shown me the night before. This time, he read aloud. Account holder, Robert Carter. Beneficiary, Ruth Carter. Purpose, education fund. Note, for Ruth's future, no one touches this but her. He let the sentence hang. Following week, he continued, tapping another page, full withdrawal initiated by Mrs. Carter, signed by Mrs. Carter and witnessed by Ms. Elaine Carter. Elaine's teeth sank into her lower lip. I've already explained that, she muttered. There were bills, George was in trouble, Mama was falling apart. What was I supposed to do? Let him go to jail? Yes, I said and shocked myself. Maybe. They all turned to me. That money was mine, I said quietly. Daddy wanted me to have a way out. You decided his wishes didn't matter because your crisis felt bigger than my future. Oh, listen to her, George scoffed. Like you would have made it out there. You practically had a panic attack that one semester at community college. Mama did you a favor keeping you close. By signing my name away like it was hers to give, I said. His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Daniel's fingers slid to the next page. About this, he said. 5 years later, mortgage refinance. New co-signer Ruth Carter, signature on file. He held it up so they could all see. That is your handwriting, isn't it, Ms. Elaine? He asked mildly. Elaine's breath caught. That's not. Experts disagree, he said, but we can let Ruth decide first. He handed the paper to me. My eyes went straight to the signature line. Ruth A. Carter, only it wasn't mine. My signature leans right. I've always put a little loop on the R because I used to dot my I's with hearts, and some of that girl never left my hand. This signature was straighter, angrier. The R cut into the line like a knife. I never signed this, I said. My voice sounded hollow. I was working double shifts that week. Mark had just lost his job. I remember because I was too tired to even go to the bank. Daniel nodded. That's what your time card says, he replied. You were clocked in, 10-hour days, meanwhile. He tapped the date stamp. Your mother and sister were at the bank, using a power of attorney created right after your father died, he said. The one that was supposed to be temporary, the one they never canceled. Elaine bristled. Mama was on the verge of losing the house, she snapped. We needed help. Ruth would have said yes, she always says yes. We just saved time. You stole her signature, Daniel said simply. You stole her stability for a second time and wrapped it in the story that she was helping. Mark laughed, short and sharp. Oh, come on, he said. Are we really going to act like some scrawled signature is a crime? Ruth's the one who ran up the credit cards. On groceries, I shot back. On school supplies. On your work boots you never paid me back for. Name one thing I bought with those cards that wasn't keeping this family afloat. He shrugged. You were the one who liked playing hero. Something in me snapped. Or maybe something finally stopped snapping and just broke clean through. I liked paying my bills, I said. I liked having a roof over our kids' heads. I liked not answering calls from debt collectors. I did your job, Mark, all of you. And then you turned around and called me dramatic for getting tired. Silence settled for a moment. George shifted, restless. Enough of this paperwork crap, he muttered. You dig through old files, pull out some junk, twist it how you want. Everybody does what they have to do in a crisis. That's how families work. Do they? Daniel asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks less like family and more like pattern. Each time something went wrong, you took something that belonged to Ruth, her name, her money, her reputation, and used it as a shield. What reputation? Mark snorted. Everyone's always felt sorry for her. Poor Ruth, always working so hard, always getting overlooked, always so sensitive. It's her favorite outfit. I looked at him then, really looked, and realized how tired his face had gotten. How small he looked without my energy propping him up. You used to tell me I was lucky to have you, I said softly, because no one else would put up with me. He smiled, lazy and mean. Still true. Daniel cleared his throat. You're right about one thing, Mr. Harris, he said. People did feel sorry for Ruth, but not for the reasons you think. He pulled his phone out again. This is a different kind of recording, he said. From the same box my grandparents kept. It was made 2 months after your father's death. The woman speaking lived 3 houses down. She moved away, but she never forgot. We tracked her down before she passed. He pressed play. An older woman's voice crackled through the speaker, tired but sharp. That girl, Ruth, she was the one always running. To the store, to the doctor, to the school. The others strutted around like they owned the place, but when the lights got turned off, it was her I saw walking home late with groceries, not them. We all knew. We just didn't say. People like that family, they eat their strongest alive. My throat burned. Elaine shifted in her seat. Small-town gossip, she said, means nothing. Does it? Daniel replied. Because it matches what we see in every document. Every time your family was in trouble, Ruth's name shows up on the paperwork. Loans, cosigns, insurance beneficiaries, debts, settlements that mysteriously disappeared. He reached into his bag one last time and pulled out a thin, worn folder. And then there's this, he said. The last insurance policy your father took out before he died. My chest tightened. I've seen that, Elaine said quickly. Mama showed it to us. It went to paying off the house, putting food on the table. There was nothing left. This isn't the main policy, Daniel said. This is a smaller one, a private one, taken out through his job, different company. He never told your mother about it. He opened the folder, pulled out a single page, and read. Primary beneficiary, Ruth Ann Carter. The room went dead silent. Daniel stepped closer to the coffee table and laid the policy down where everyone could see it. Your father took this out the year before he died, he said. We found it in the personnel files from the factory. He designated Ruth as the sole beneficiary, no contingencies. The only way she wouldn't have received it is if someone changed it. Elaine swallowed hard. That's ridiculous, she said. If there was money with her name on it, she would have gotten it. Right, Mama? Her eyes flicked around, then narrowed when she remembered our mother wasn't there. George frowned. I never heard of another policy. You didn't need to, Daniel said, because your mother did. He slid another page out, this one a copy of a change of beneficiary form. 3 weeks after your father's death, he said, this form was filed. It removes Ruth as the beneficiary and replaces her with, drumroll, the estate of Robert Carter, which, as you all know, your mother controlled. He looked at me. That money, he said quietly, was supposed to be your cushion, your way out, your protection. Instead, it went into the same pot they'd already drained your college fund into. From there, it disappeared into debts George ran up, into mortgage payments with your name forged at the bottom, into bail and settlements, and all the invisible ways a family keeps its favorite sons comfortable. The room spun for a second. Let me see that, Elaine snapped, snatching the paper. Her eyes scanned it, growing wild. This isn't, Mama never. Daniel's voice cut gently through her denial. Signature at the bottom, he said. Mrs. Carter. If you'd like to argue forgery, I'm sure we can dig into that as well, but something tells me this one is real. George leaned forward, face flushing an ugly red. So what? He growled. So she changed a form. We needed the money. Everybody borrowed. We all sacrificed. You act like Ruth is some saint when she's been moaning about being trapped her whole life. Nobody forced her to stay." "You're right," Daniel said. "Nobody chained her to this house. They just emptied every exit she had and left her holding the bill." He turned to look at me fully. "This is the part you need to hear, Ms. Ruth," he said. "The part my grandmother wrote in that letter. The part your father tried to say before he died." My limbs felt heavy. My ears rang. Still, I nodded. "In our house," Daniel said slowly, "the story was never that your name was dirty. It was that your name was useful. When something needed to be done quietly, they put it in Ruth's name. When something needed to look respectable, they put Ruth's name on it. When something needed to be hidden from the people who might ask questions, they slid it behind Ruth's too-good-to-be-true reputation. You weren't their problem, Ms. Ruth. You were their cover." The words landed like a verdict. My name wasn't the stain. It was the shield. All those years I'd thought I was the family embarrassment, the one who cried too easily, who worked too much, who made everything about her. All those nights I'd lain awake wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve the cold shoulders, the whispered conversations in the kitchen, the snide jokes about me being extra or dramatic. And the whole time, my name had been the one they reached for when they needed to hide what they'd done. I started, then stopped. My throat closed up. Elaine was shaking her head over and over, like if she did it long enough she could rewind time. "That's not fair," she choked out. "You don't understand what it was like. After Daddy died, everything fell on us. She wasn't herself. George was in trouble. Mark was useless. We did what we had to do to keep this family from falling apart." "And how much of that doing?" Daniel asked quietly. "Did you put on Ruth because she was the one person you knew would never leave? Because she was the one person you could always guilt into saying yes? Because if anything went wrong, everyone would say, 'Oh, Ruth must have messed up. She's so emotional, you know how she is.'" I watched their faces as he spoke. George's jaw clenched. Mark's smirk faded. Elaine's eyes filled and overflowed, black mascara starting to smudge. Something ugly twisted in my stomach. It wasn't just anger. It was recognition. It was the feeling of seeing my own reflection clearly for the first time after a lifetime of warped mirrors. I never wanted to hurt you," Elaine whispered suddenly, looking at me. "I swear, Ruth, you were always the strong one. Mama always said, 'Ruth can handle it. Ruth understands.' We believed her." "And did you ever ask," I said slowly, "if I wanted to handle it, if I wanted to understand?" She opened her mouth, closed it. George slapped his hands on his knees and stood up, energy sparking off him like a live wire. "This is garbage," he snarled. "Some outsider shows up with a few dusty papers and suddenly we're all monsters. We did what families do. We took care of our own." "You took care of yourselves," I said quietly. "You used me to do it." "Same thing," he snapped. Daniel's gaze stayed on me. "This is the moment," he said softly. "The one my grandmother wrote about. She said if I ever got this far with you, you'd start to apologize. You'd start to tell them it's okay, that you understand, that you don't want to ruin things." He was right. The words were already lined up in my mouth, obedient and familiar. I could feel them pressing on my teeth. I swallowed them. "I'm not apologizing," I said. My voice shook, but I kept going. "Not this time." George barked a laugh. "So what now?" he said. "You gonna sue us, lock Mama up, take us to court with your little paramedic fan club?" I looked at him, at all of them, at the people I'd cooked for, cleaned for, covered for, cried over. "No," I said, "I'm not taking you anywhere." Relief flickered across Elaine's face. Mark exhaled loudly, like he'd been holding his breath. "I'm done taking you anywhere," I added. "That's the difference." The relief vanished. "You can't do this," Elaine said, voice rising. "You can't just walk away from your family, after everything we've been through." "You walked away first," I replied. "You just did it while still eating at my table." We stared at each other, decades of unspoken words hanging between us like fog. My knees trembled. Part of me wanted to sit down, put my head in my hands, and tell them all I was sorry for making a fuss, for inviting the stranger in, for looking behind the curtain. But another part, the part my father called his little anchor, held. Daniel broke the silence. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "One more piece you all need to see. Then I'll go if that's what you want. But you'll never again be able to say you didn't know." He reached into the satchel one last time and pulled out a small, battered cassette tape in a clear plastic case. It looked fragile, almost trivial, the way history always does when you can hold it in your hand. "My father made this the week after Mr. Carter died," he said. "He was bothered by how neat the story became, so he wrote down everything he'd heard, everything people told him in whispers, and then he drove back to this street, sat outside your house, and talked into this tape." My heart slammed against my ribs. "He kept it," Daniel went on, "because of something your father said in the back of that ambulance before he lost consciousness. A single sentence that didn't fit the official story. A sentence that made my father think, this man knows they're coming for his daughter." I felt the room tilt. Elaine shook her head furiously. "We're not listening to some." But Daniel had already walked over to the old tape player under my TV, the one I hadn't used in years but never quite managed to throw away. He slid the tape in, pressed it down, and hit play. The machine word then clicked. Static crackled. Then a younger version of a voice I'd come to trust, the same steady tone as Daniel's, but rougher around the edges, filled the room. "Name, Patrick Miller. If anyone's hearing this besides me, then I guess I had a reason to keep talking. This is about the Carter family, Robert Carter specifically. Factory guy. Fell down his own damn stairs according to the paperwork. But that's not what's eating at me, it's what he said on the way in." The static swelled, then softened. "He grabbed my sleeve," the recorded Patrick said, his voice turning soft with memory. "Blood everywhere, can't hardly breathe, but he still gets this out. He says, don't let them blame Ruth. They'll put it all on her. They always do. I signed things, I hid things, I tried to make it right, but they'll twist it. She don't know, she don't know." Then he wheezes out one last thing. "Tell whoever listens my girl is clean. Her name is the only clean thing in that house." The tape clicked faintly as Patrick exhaled into history. In my living room, nobody moved. My father's words hung there, decades late, finally finding the air they'd been meant for. "My girl is clean. Her name is the only clean thing in that house." I felt something break open inside me. Not the sharp break of damage, the clean split of something unbinding. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. George stared at the tape player like it might explode. Mark looked away, jaw clenched. Daniel pressed stop. The machine clicked off. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was stunned. It was the sound of people realizing the story they'd been using to sleep at night no longer fit. He turned back to them, then to me. "That's the piece," he said quietly. "That's what he wanted someone to know, that your name was never the stain they made you believe it was. It was the shield they hid behind." My legs finally gave out, and I sank into the nearest chair. All the years of being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, all the times I'd been told to calm down. Be grateful, stop taking things so personally. All the nights I'd lain awake wondering what was wrong with me that I couldn't just let things go. And yet, the last thing my father said to a stranger wasn't that he regretted his life. It wasn't that he was afraid of dying. It was that I was clean. I looked at my family, at their shocked faces, their tight jaws, their eyes refusing to meet mine. And for the first time in my life, I realized something simple and terrible. They needed my silence more than they ever needed my love. And I suddenly wasn't sure I was willing to give them either. People think the big moment is when the truth explodes in the room. They don't tell you that the real work starts the day after, when you still have to get up and brush your teeth and decide what you're going to do with the quiet. The morning after the trial, as I've started calling it in my head, the house felt different. Not cleaner, not lighter, just honest. It was like someone had turned on the overhead lights in a room I'd only ever seen by lamp. I could finally see where the dust had been gathering. My family left that day the way they always leave, in a flurry of slammed doors and half-finished sentences. George stomped out first, muttering about ungrateful women and outsiders. Elaine followed after calling me selfish and dramatic and then crying because she hated that she'd called me that. She never did know the difference between remorse and embarrassment. Mark was last. He paused at the door, looked back at me like he was about to throw one more dart, then just shrugged and said, "Good luck with your truth," like it was a hobby I'd picked up. When the last car pulled away, I stood in my living room and listened. No voices, no accusations, no one calling my name to solve a problem they'd created. Just the clock ticking, and the heater humming and my own breath going in and out. It was the strangest thing in the world, being alone and realizing I wasn't lonely. For a while, I did nothing. That might be the part people don't understand when they talk about taking your power back. They think it's instant. They think you rip your life up like a bad check and start over the next day. Me, I washed the dishes. I picked up the crumpled papers. I put the tape back in its little case. I folded my father's letter in half along the crease it had already learned and put it in the top drawer of my dresser, underneath my socks, where I keep my jewelry and other things that have value only I understand. Then I made a pot of soup, turned on the radio, and let my body remember what ordinary felt like. The changes didn't come in one big decision. They came like the snow melt, slowly, steadily, one drop at a time. The first thing I did was make an appointment with a lawyer. I didn't tell my family. I didn't ask their opinion. I went down to the little office on Main Street where half the divorces and wills in this town have passed through, sat in a leather chair that squeaked every time I shifted, and laid out the stack of documents Daniel had helped me organize. The lawyer was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a gaze like a level. She didn't gasp, didn't clutch her pearls, didn't tell me I was overreacting. She flipped through each page, occasionally asking a clarifying question. "Did you authorize this signature?" "No." "Were you aware of this policy?" "No." "Did you see any of this money?" I laughed. Do I look like I saw any of it? She smiled, just a little. "You know we can't go back 30 years and untangle everything," she said when she finished. "Some of these companies don't even exist anymore. Statutes of limitation are what they are." "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to get rich off ghosts." "What are you trying to get?" she asked. I thought about it. No one had ever asked me that without also telling me what I should want. "Proof," I said finally. "In my name, on paper, that I'm not crazy. That they used my signature and my silence and my life for things I never agreed to." She nodded like that was an answer she respected. "We can do some of that," she said. "We can get certified copies of what we have here. We can file a statement on your behalf contesting the use of your name in specific cases, so there's a record. And we can absolutely make sure it never happens again." "Never happens again," I repeated. The words felt good in my mouth. We spent 2 hours drafting things, revoking old powers of attorney, removing my name from accounts I didn't even know I was still attached to, updating my own will. Imagine that, a document about my life that was actually centered on me. The whole time, a small, scared voice in the back of my mind kept whining. What if they get mad? What if they say you're ungrateful? What if you're starting a war? And another voice, newer, quieter, but growing, answered, "Let them." When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt level, like the ground under my feet had finally stopped tilting in their direction. The next test came faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the snowstorm, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. George. Old Ruth would have answered on the first ring. I let it go to the second. The third. I answered on the fourth just to prove to myself that I could. "Yeah," he said as soon as I picked up, not even bothering with hello. "Bank says I need a cosigner for this new truck. They're being idiots. You know my credit's good, they're just." "I'm not signing," I said. He chuckled, assuming he'd misheard. "What?" "I'm not signing," I repeated, "for anything ever again." Silence crackled on the line. "Stop being dramatic, Ruth," he said finally. "It's not like I'm asking you for money, it's just paperwork." Paperwork, the same word they always used to make theft sound harmless. I understand that you don't see a difference, I said. But I do. The answer's no. You're really going to do this, he demanded. After everything I've done for you. I almost asked, like what? But I knew that game. He'd start listing every time he'd carried a box for me, eaten dinner at my table, watched my kids for an hour while he was already sitting on my couch. Favors I'd paid for 10 times over. I hope you figure it out, I said instead, but I won't be part of it. You're ruining this family, he snapped. I took a breath. No, I said. I'm just refusing to ruin myself for it anymore. Then I did something that felt like jumping off a cliff. I hung up. I stood there staring at the phone, waiting for the adrenaline crash, the guilt wave, the urge to call back and smooth things over. It came, sure, my chest tightened, my palms sweated, but I didn't move. I made myself a cup of tea instead. That's how my revenge looks, if you're curious. Not knives or lawsuits or public screaming matches. Tea instead of explanation. Silence instead of one more apology. Over the next few months, I practiced the word no, the way some people practice the piano. At first, it was clumsy, stiff, accompanied by too many words. Can you watch the kids this weekend? We've got tickets. I'm so sorry, I can't. I've just got so much. I stopped, tried again. No, I can't. Why? They ask, indignant. Because I don't want to, I answer. Or because I'm resting. Or because I have plans, even if those plans were just me and a library book. I stopped giving 10-minute explanations for 5-second decisions. It felt rude at first. Like eating before everyone else had sat down. But slowly, something shifted. People stopped pushing quite so hard. Some went elsewhere. A few simmered in their resentment, sure, but I'd lived my whole life marinating in other people's disappointment. I could handle a little more as long as the pot I was in was mine. Not everything was a clean break. Some relationships froze completely. George stopped calling except for the obligatory holiday group calls, where he'd make stiff small talk and then hand the phone to one of his kids so he didn't have to talk to me long. I'd hear him in the background, laughing too loudly, acting like his life was a sitcom that just didn't have room for my plotline anymore. My mother chose denial. We spoke twice. The first time, she pretended nothing had happened, asked about the weather, asked whether I'd been to church, threw in a few digs about outsiders stirring up foolishness. The second time, she launched straight into a lecture about forgiveness and how good daughters don't dig up all that. Daddy asked someone to protect me, I said quietly. You knew what he meant. She went quiet then, for a long time. He was confused, she said finally. On the stretcher, he didn't know what he was saying. He knew enough to write it down the night before, I replied. She hung up on me. We haven't spoken since. I'd love to tell you it didn't hurt. That once you find your backbone, you stop bleeding when people cut you out. But the truth is, I cried. A lot. In the shower. In the car. Quietly in the canned goods aisle when I saw a woman helping her elderly mother pick out soup. You can know you're doing the right thing and still grieve what it costs you. Some relationships cooled into something bearable. Not warm, but not actively burning. Elaine showed up at my door one afternoon in March. No appointment, no warning, holding a Tupperware of lasagna like it was a peace treaty. She looked smaller somehow, out of her usual armor. I'm not here to fight, she said before I could speak. We always bring food when things fall apart. It felt wrong not to bring anything. We ate in the kitchen. We didn't talk about the tape. We didn't talk about the insurance. We talked about her kids, my grandkids, a TV show we both liked. There was a moment when she looked at my dresser drawer. She knows that's where I keep important papers, and I saw questions flicker across her face. But she didn't ask them, not that day. As she left, she hesitated on the porch. I always knew you were the good one, she blurted, eyes fixed on the snow still clinging to the hedges. I just thought good meant available. I'm trying to rethink that. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest she'd ever come to admitting she'd built her comfort on my compliance. Me too, I said. I'm rethinking it too. We hugged, awkward but real. When she drove away, I realized something. I would be okay whether she came back or not. That knowledge was worth more than any proper apology. A surprising few relationships softened in ways I didn't expect. My oldest niece, the one who used to roll her eyes every time adults talked about family secrets, called me late one night. "Aunt Ruth," she said, voice hushed, "I heard about everything. Dad says you've lost your mind, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" I asked gently. "But it makes sense," she whispered. "The way people talk. The way Grandma acts like everything's fine when it's obviously not. I just wanted to say I believe you, and if you need anything, I'm here." I pressed my hand over my mouth so she wouldn't hear the sob trying to escape. "I'm okay," I managed, "but thank you more than you know." I started building small rituals, little acts of loyalty to myself. I lit a candle every night before bed, not for anyone else, not for memorials or prayer lists, just for me. A reminder that my life had a light of its own, separate from who needed me that day. I began walking in the mornings, even when it was cold. Especially when it was cold. There's something about watching your breath cloud the air while the sun fights through the frost that makes you feel like maybe you can survive your own seasons. I took up journaling again. Not the tidy gratitude lists I used to keep to prove to myself that I was lucky, not the budgets and chore charts. Just messy, honest pages where I wrote things like, "I'm angry," and "I miss being ignorant," and "Today I said no and the world didn't end." And slowly, I started telling my story. Not to my family, not at first. They already had their version, and I was done auditioning for a part in it. It started with one woman at church, a widow who always sat in the back, who everyone said was bitter because she didn't smile much. I'd seen the way her jaw tightened when people made jokes about nagging wives or crazy exes. One day after service, we ended up in the kitchen together, washing dishes after a potluck. Somehow, in between the colanders and casserole dishes, she mentioned her son blaming her for his father leaving. The old me would have offered a Bible verse and a casserole recipe. Instead, I heard myself say, "My family blamed me for things I didn't do for 40 years. She blinked. "Really?" I told her a piece. Not the whole saga, just the part about the insurance, about the college fund, about realizing that being the good one had made me the most convenient scapegoat. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned off the tap, dried her hands, and said, "You just said my whole life out loud." We started talking regularly after that. On the phone, over coffee. Sometimes in the parking lot with the car doors cracked, the heat on, winter pressing its nose against the glass. Word got around, not the details, just the general outline. Ruth, not taking any more nonsense. She's different. A younger woman from town, one I only knew from the pharmacy, sent me a message on social media. "Hi, Ms. Ruth," she wrote. "I heard you're good at saying no now. Can you teach me?" I laughed out loud when I read it. Then I thought about it. And then, slowly, I started. I didn't set out to be some kind of mentor. I don't have certificates or letters after my name. All I have is a house full of old paperwork and a heart that finally learned how to lock the door. But I started writing. Little posts. Little anonymous stories online about the cost of being the good one. About families that eat their strongest alive. About how loyalty without boundaries is just self-harm in a prettier dress. Sometimes I imagine my father reading them. Squinting at a screen, he'd pretend he didn't know how to work, nodding along. That thought alone keeps me going on days when the old habits tug at me like ghosts. I won't lie to you. Empowerment is not glamorous. It's not dramatic speeches and perfectly timed slaps and everyone gasping and learning their lesson. It's paying your own bills slowly, on time. It's going home when the conversation turns ugly instead of staying to prove you can take it. It's deleting a long text you wrote at 2 in the morning to explain yourself and replacing it with, "I've already said what I needed to say." It's lonely sometimes. The phone doesn't ring as much. Holidays look different. The group photos get smaller. But the peace is something else. Months after that snowstorm, winter came back around. It always does. One evening, I found myself at the same window where it all began. Snow was falling again, softer this time, floating down like feathers instead of bullets. The streetlights turned each flake into a tiny, spinning light. I had the tape on the table, my father's letter, a new stack of papers with my name on them, things I'd chosen, things I'd signed for myself. Daniel and I kept in touch, by the way. Not constantly, not in some dramatic movie way. A call here and there. A postcard from the city where he'd moved. An email with a scanned document he'd dug up from some archive that filled in one more blank. He called the week my mother stopped speaking to me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm grieving," I said, "but I'm okay." "That," aloud, he replied. "You know where I am if you need to remember you're not crazy." "I'm starting to remember that on my own," I told him. Now, on this new winter night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook open and my pen resting on the page. I'd written the title at the top. How I Stopped Apologizing for Existing. Underneath, I'd started my story. A simple line. The night he knocked on my door, the snow was coming down sideways. I smiled, realizing I was back where I started. But this time, I was the one telling the story on purpose. And if you're still listening to me now, after all of this, then I want to leave you with the thing it took me almost 60 years to understand. You cannot control what your family hides. You cannot control the stories they tell about you at other people's kitchen tables, the secrets they twist into shapes that make them look better, the way they hand your name to the world like a dirty dishcloth when they need someone to blame. But you can control one thing. You can control whether you spend the rest of your life protecting their lies or honoring your own truth. Dignity doesn't begin when everyone apologizes and admits they were wrong. If that's what you're waiting for, you might be waiting till the grave. Dignity begins the moment you stop apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for asking questions, for wanting out, for wanting more, for saying no. If a stranger came to your door with the truth about your family, messy, inconvenient, lined with old paper and older pain, would you let him in? Would you pull that door open on a bitter night and walk him into the kitchen and listen, even when your whole body shook with the urge to say, "No, no, that can't be true"? Or would you send him back out into the snow and call your relatives and tell them not to worry? Everything's fine, nothing's wrong, we're all good here. I can't answer that for you. I can only tell you what happened when I opened the door. It hurt. It shattered things I thought I needed. It took people I loved and showed me the cracks I'd been painting over for decades. It forced me to admit my part in my own suffering, that I had stayed, forgiven, covered, apologized long after the bill had come due. But it also gave me my own name back. So, if you've walked any part of this road with me, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have opened the door, walked away, stayed and played peacemaker one more time? Tell me, not for me, but for you. Put it into words. Sometimes seeing your answer written down is the first step toward changing it. And if my story touched you, or made you feel a little less like you're losing your mind, or gave you that tiny spark of maybe I'm not crazy, maybe I'm just finally waking up, then don't let it stay just between us. Stay with me. Follow, subscribe. Share this with another woman who needs to hear that she's not the problem. She's just been carrying everyone else. Send it to the friend who always says yes while her eyes look tired. To the aunt who raised everybody and got thanked with silence. To the woman who keeps asking, was it really that bad? Because no one around her wants her to remember. We can't fix everything that was buried, but we can stop lying on top of it. And on nights like this, when the snow comes down and the world goes quiet, we can sit at our own tables, with our own names written in our own hands, and know that for the first time in a long time. We finally open the door to ourselves.